Hey guys, welcome back to Precursive Perspective with Jonathan. I am delighted to be joined by Mark Henoch, who is based in Germany and is currently the SVP of SaaS delivery at SimCorp. How are you doing, Mark?
Very good. Thanks for the invite, Jonathan.
Yeah, no worries, no worries. That is a very organized bookshelf behind you. That
Yeah, I just
speaks.
made it look really, really cute for the podcast.
I look organized, but the other side of the room is like there's all this rubbish thrown in the corner. So it's great to have you on. How are things? How was your holiday? Were you in? Did you stay in Germany or did you go anywhere
No,
nice?
I was actually on the Canaries with a family on vacation. So it was dry and warm and hot and just what you want. It was a very relaxing holiday and we really enjoyed it. How was yours?
Amazing. Well, I didn't really have a holiday. We had the school holidays, but we had our holiday in Easter. So we did a few days off here and there. By the end of it, I think everyone wanted to kill everybody else. But my wife took the children away for a couple of days at the end to the beach, which was great. So no, I'll get a holiday at some point.
At least it was probably also still hot and dry.
Yeah, exactly. It's been a heat wave in London for like the whole summer, so it was crazy. I'm super excited to get you on the show. As I've started calling you both to your face and other to people, the Jedi Knight of managed services. So really excited to get you on. Would you mind giving us a little bit of background to yourself and your career, if you don't mind, sir?
I can do that. So I'm 49 years old by now, and originally by education, I'm a physicist. So I've been working in foundational research for a couple of years. And then 19 years ago, I quit research and started working in SimCorp. SimCorp is an investment management software company, or was at that time. Now I would say it's probably a SaaS company and not just a traditional software company. And in the last 15 years, I've been working in various senior leadership roles in both product development and the services unit, and the latest as our SaaS delivery responsible.
Awesome,
And in
awesome.
addition to that, in addition
Yep.
to that, I've also been working on advisory boards such as TSIA, for example,
Yep.
and work with a widely experienced group of senior leaders on this very transformation topic of moving a traditional software company into a modern SaaS company, and what that means and how much mindset recalibration that requires.
Okay, awesome. Because that is, put simply, for some of the larger companies that I deal with, and many more traditional software companies, is exactly what they're trying to do, and it's not always as easy as they hope. So really excited to dig into some of your experience. So you've kind of seen the evolution of services in this world. I mean, what have you seen in terms of the world of professional services in recent years, given the modern SaaS economy?
Yeah, and I think there's an important disclaimer in the beginning, because everything I say is in the context of a software company. There's, of
Yep,
course, a wide selection of professional services out
of
there
course.
that has undergone very different transformations and changes, like, I don't know, law
Yep.
firms and accounting firms and so on.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
my experience is, of
Absolutely.
course,
We're
with the
talking
software
about
world.
PS in the software world. Exactly
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think every successful software vendor over the past decades had a form of professional services, typically the project business, to implement the software so the clients can actually use it.
Yeah.
And it is sometimes bigger, sometimes smaller. It's typically a profitable business, but it's very much the classical project type organization. So it is enablement value in the very beginning of the life cycle in
Mm-hmm.
order to set something up for future use. That is not really transforming in itself, but what I just called enablement services, I think is now there's a raising child on the other side of that balance, which I would call adoption services. And these
Yep.
are all the stuff that is accompanying the phase of the actual system use by the customer. So in the future, I believe and already now, there is a different mix, and managed services is very much about the adoption services of this.
Yep.
And the service scope has enlarged significantly with the trend of everything as a service in recent years. And
Yep.
when I say everything as a service, it's probably important to connotate that everything doesn't mean everything the software provider likes as a service, but it really needs to become something along the lines of everything that the client needs as a service for a certain competency area. And that also shows that there's a link to the growing importance of customer success. I mean, if you open up LinkedIn or whatever, then there's a gazillion posts around customer success. And if you ask around many companies, then 50% of the cases you find come to the question very fast, okay, and how did you mess up customer success? Because it's also a new discipline, and there's a lot to learn and a lot to do wrong probably in the beginning and the first steps of this.
Yeah, no, I think it's a good summary. I mean, I was literally just at a conference the last couple of days facilitating for a room of like heads of customer success, VPs customer success. And it was interesting because there was 5 or 6 different six different companies, all ranging from probably 150 employees to several thousand employees. And without exception, they all had quite a medium to a heavy professional services motion, let's call it, right? So it wasn't one of these, you switch on the app and off you go.
Yeah.
And so
there's a funny thing with this customer success orientation. Customer centricity doesn't only show in how people think and that clients are important to us. I think that should go without saying, otherwise you shouldn't even be a successful company. But client centricity means that you put the client into the center of how you work and how you sell and how you deliver and how you look at your own business. Yeah. And that is a very different thing than saying clients are important to me. And that is very often a little superficially dealt with. And then, of course, we're very client-centric. And then it's just old wine in new bottles and nothing really changes much.
Well, it was interesting because all of these people said, without it, the question I had asked was, who do you need to, like, if you think about who do you need to build the strongest relationships within your business? And everyone started with sales. And then I was like, who's next in the business? And there was kind of like the thinking. And I was like, well, what about professional services? And they were like, oh, yeah. Oh, actually, no, 100%. Because we're always reliant on them before us. Because if that doesn't go well, we're in trouble. And I was like, well, is it really sales then? Or is it actually professional services, right? Because, you know, when you think about like the kind of the customer journey, it's like, well, you know, yes, everything starts at the front end and you got to get it right there. But, you know, fundamentally, the person that is most important to you potentially is the person right before you in the step in the customer journey. But it was just so interesting how a group of CS leaders was so inherently reliant on you know, a different department in order for them to do their job, which is modern companies anyway. But
and I like this, you know, the idea with the customer journey, I think is a very good leading thought also for the managed service or packaging ideas or, you know, anything that relates to software as a service. And that is, you know, if you take the entire life cycle of a customer engagement in B2B, that should be of many years term length. So let's just say it's 10 years. Then you have an engagement at the beginning, which is the sales. And then you have an engagement that follows that, which is also time limited, which is the implementation. And by far the longest period is the value consumption period that comes after. And if you then look at the traditional setup, you have a lot of relationship in sales and a lot of relationship in the project phase. And then what? You know, if you then just throw it over the fence to customer success and now it's all your business, that is, I think, taking things from the wrong end. So you need to start with the customer success and feed that back into what you sell and how you implement that. Because otherwise, you know, everyone probably has seen not so well maintainable solution approaches of your software and your customer. And that is the outcome of the wrong mind order. You need to turn this upside down and start with the outcome and then work yourself backwards.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, I think that's that. Do you think that if we talk about that and expand on that, like the managed services world, right, and the role that it plays, like you've talked about how it's actually sort of feeding back in, isn't it, to the front end and to product and to engineering based upon the experience you're seeing with your in-life customers. Do you think that there's something wrong with the name of it? Like a lot of it's called managed services, right, which isn't very sexy, and customer success is a bit more sexy. So I'm just curious to know, like, because what are we really talking about that help people who maybe are newer to this world? Like, take us through a little bit about what that managed services actually is. Forget about the name for a moment, but what is it in this consumption?
And even if we start with the name, I
Yeah.
think managed services is not even a very bad description of what it actually contains, because
Yeah.
it is actually managing an ongoing business. It is not characterized by, a project service is characterized by milestone achievements, et cetera, right? So you have a certain enablement delivery, you have a timeline, you track that with milestones, et cetera, et cetera. Managed services are not tracked with milestones. They're tracked with daily routines that need to be executed according to quality gates, such as SLAs, et cetera, et cetera. So, if you go to, if you have if you're a private consumer of a managed services, for example, let's imagine you have someone doing the mowing of your lawn, right? Yeah. That is a managed services, because it's not a project, right? It's not like, hey, now I have 2 weeks where my lawn needs mowing, and then not again in a fortnight. So you will do this on a continuous basis. And what you do is you don't care about the tools they're using. You don't care about, a lot of different things that are how they do their work. What you care about is the SLA. Like, okay, so you mow my lawn. It'll be done by, I don't know, Saturday morning, 11 o'clock every second week or something like that. And it's going to cost me this, and everything will be taken care of. That is what, the managed service is really all about. It's not about, hey, I can rent you the lawn mower, and I can give you this, and you can also bring your garbage then to that and that corner. That is rather fragmented services. But if you get a full packaged managed services, it's rather everything in a box, right? And you don't care about the features of his tooling, and this doesn't sell to you. What sells to you is really the outcome that you're getting and how easy it is and how predictable it is, probably. And I think that is, in terms of non-technicality, I think that is the difference between service fragmentation and an offering here and there, and a packaged managed services that just gives you I know what I'm getting outcome. And let's face it, most softwares don't have that history unless they were kind of born as software as a service companies in very recent years. Traditionally, they have a high functional, feature-rich thing, and sales goes by demonstrating what the software and the tooling can actually do. Managed services rather goes by, here's how I do the work. This is my excellence statements. These are the SLAs. But it's not really a demonstration of features. It's rather, this is how I'm going to work. And it's rather a process description and the trust that lies within your apparent expertise about the business as to how to mow a lawn, for example, or cut the hedges.
Okay. Yeah, I like the analogy. I think based upon probably my mum and dad would comment on my lawn mowing skills as a teenager. Like, it was definitely not a project. It was definitely reactive. I don't think I was within the SLAs or the time that was allowed.
But you didn't do it as a profession either, right?
No, I couldn't get the lines right. I would go all over the place, right? I still do. You should see my wife just laughs at me when I've got the fly mower in the back garden. She's just like, you are just useless at that task. But I like the analogies. But so I have a follow-up question. And again, this comes from some recent conversations that I was having with a company, which is, you have businesses that, however they like it or not, they're suffering from a degree of commoditization, right? And some organizations have got products that are probably highly commoditized because maybe they actually are a commodity. So actually the differentiator is the service layer that they provide, right? That's if you look at the telecoms sector, for example, like one of the reasons why, the Vodafones, the T-Mobiles, all of these guys have branched out into digital, right, is because they were selling SIM cards. And that was what they were sold, and they were highly commoditized. So they moved from pushing tin to selling services. So this, like you say, you've got this the post-launch, the in-life period, which is where you align managed services. So is that also, whilst it's providing this responsiveness to the client, is there also this value add, which is that's what creates your differentiator, and therefore you need to potentially think about how you design the service in that way to offer you that differentiation? That was a bit of a long-winded question.
Yeah, So the commoditization, it's a subject to every industry eventually, I would say.
Yep.
The commoditized pieces are, so your clients will probably see the commoditized components as a necessary evil. They need to have some of this, but nobody finds this sexy. And if somebody would do some magic and it would vanish, everybody would be happy. So it's also much more seen as an evil cost thing that should be squeezed to the minimum because nobody cares what you really get out because it's not a value differentiator. If you're in that as a vendor, if you're in that situation and you want bigger margins, then you're screwed. So you need to find ways to package your things so they probably become more attractive or you gain more scale. It could be various things. And that's the beauty thing with packaging. Packaging follows a very simple idea or follows a very simple reasoning. If you package things together, you want to simplify its consumption. Quite straightforward, right? So, you manage all the T-Mobile and Vodafone and what have we. Yep. All the telecommunication carriers, they have done transactional fees in the very beginning, for example, and they move to rather flat fee type of constructions in recent years, which is by far now the most common thing. It's also commoditized, but why did they package things together and made it a flat fee? Because it is nicer to consume for me because, for example, the costs are predictable, right? And it might not even be the most optimum way of me utilizing a mobile phone. Probably transactional cost would have been cheaper for me, but then I don't know what's coming. So if you are on the vendor side of things, what do you need to consider if you think about packaging? You need to consider why are my clients actually buying what they buy from me and what for? And are they buying a commodity or am I part of an individual value increase service, for example, that they provide? If I'm in the latter, well, that's of course easy. If I'm not, then I can use packaging to either simplify my commodity business or find a complementary component that increases into the higher value add components, for example. For example, all the managed services 10 years ago used to be only infrastructure and platform operations, basically. And now it's a much wider extension of everything you would do as recurring services in the run phase, for example. So that evolution is the same thing. It moved from something that was a pure commodity, which is the infrastructure, into something where the value add is, where, unique configuration of your software, for example, to meet a dedicated business model of your customer. That is a value add component for your customer, but it's probably not as standardizable or commoditizable as the hardware it's running on. So, I think the packaging is very important to know what on earth are you packaging for? Do you want to gain new customers, avoid churn? And then what's your problem statement to start with to find out what is actually the right approach to this?
Yeah. Well, I think what my observation is that it somewhat depends on the stage of the company and the maturity of the company as to what they sort of think about building and how they prioritize. That's what I've observed. As you know, you and I got to know each other through some of the research that I was doing into how companies are productizing their services or their success offerings. And kind of my observations on it are that the earlier stage companies, and I would say that's kind of your mid-market businesses from probably anywhere from 150, maybe even up to 800 people, and obviously there's some big differences in that range. But what I saw there was they were focused very much, as you said, on the beginning of the journey, right? Fundamentally our implementations are not as consistent or as quick as we want them to be. So the kind of highest priority is how do we increase the quality and the velocity of delivery, which drives faster time to value. If anyone says we don't want that, then they're off their head, but that's what everyone wants. And so I think that there's this realization at a point of it's kind of like the Wild West. And I was chatting about this with someone 2 nights ago, and it's you're kind of in services, you're like the Tasmanian devil, right? It's you're running around and then you show this thing to the customer and they go, yeah, that's kind of all right. And you're like, fucking hell, that has taken us so much effort to put together. And so people reach this point and they're like, no, I'm not going to do this. We need to standardize it. And I think so they start there. So, but I'm curious to know what your guidance would be on if people are thinking about the packaging, maybe for the in-life component. What are some of your thoughts there about how should they go about it and what should they create? And then perhaps if we move on after that to the consumption models.
All right. So that's a complex question.
Yeah.
So let's try and structure that a little bit. So if you are, let's just say you have a software business and your implementations go along fine, then typically, and let me just describe that a little bit so we know where we're starting from. Then, you start your project with expectations, then the rubber meets the road and things go a little different and you need to adjust a little bit and you really try to make the customer successful and they bring up everything they had before or they have on their wish list, right? The typical implementation unit then would try to accommodate all of these. Typically, our pitfalls that they fall into with regards to maintainability is what do they do with that configuration across version upgrades of your software? How sustainable is that configuration? Pitfalls they also might fall into is scalability. What if they triple? What if they have 100 times the volume of that business on your platform all of a sudden? Does it still scale, or does it only work as an exception handling thing for a minor volume? Two very typical things that if you start from selling and then implementing and then operating, then you run into these troubles. If you want a highly valuable run phase for your customer, you need to turn this upside down. So you start with designing the processes for operations, then basically designing what do you need in either your software or your implementation to do this in a scalable fashion, in a repeatable fashion. So it's also not like all your 2,000 customers have 2,000 totally different ways of doing things. Then even a standard software doesn't do you a lot of good because there's no such thing as a standard use. So these are, I think, pitfalls that have nothing to do with packaging anything. It's just a different order mindset. If you put the operating reality, total cost of operations, total ease of operations, whatever you would quantify, put that first and make that the guiding principles of how you implement and how you develop your product, then you're changing the game, but long term. Now, if you want short term with all the fragmented things that you might be offering because your customers ran into trouble, right? Then they run something and they find out they're missing the competencies in this and that field and they want vendor help on something, which is great, right? Nobody complains about additional service requests and you can earn some money with this. But actually, if you do this ad hoc, it's non-repeatable. It's actually also very cost intensive for you to deliver. And then it's very cost intensive for the client as well to consume it. That pressure is increasing. So you cannot really just say, yeah, whatever you need, it's just gonna have that price tag and there you go. So with the price competition in global operating models, you need to be a little more upfront with what is my operating model for the delivery that I want to do in a standardized fashion to my customers. And then it probably starts with focusing. So what is really the key, most repeated consumption gap that our clients are talking about and fix that? Make a standard service that actually fixes that and embed that within your standard offering. And you can always do gold, silver, bronze tiering or something like this on a certain offering. But if you come with zero coverage and then let them run into a problem, then this might be easy to manage as a vendor, but it's not customer success centric, it's not outcome focused, and it's not managed services. So in the end, I think you just have to choose whether you want to walk the talk or not.
I love that. I love that idea of like flipping that customer journey on the head. And what was the phrase you used? Looking at it from the operational run.
Yes.
What was that?
So to me, it's always, you have the sales, the relationship engagement and selling, implementing, operating. And the operating is the repeat until that circle, right? So you repeat this ideally forever. So you have new implementations, modifications of something, new business to kind of put onto your platform. All that comes as an organic thing while you operate it. And if you don't think building into how you operate something, then you never have the operation optimized. And I think, it's one of the magic tricks is to really turn this upside down and go away from the consecutive order of things into the outcome-based thing and put the outcome first.
I like the fact that you've raised it because we did something that like this, but it was not intentional. or it was
Lucky you
intentional.
then.
Well, yeah. So we were just looking at technical debt, right? So we operate on the Salesforce platform, which means there are certain complexities when we would update our application with a customer because it's in their instance of Salesforce, right? So we were seeing, or we have seen that the complexity and the cost of maintaining that upgrading piece, because some of our customers are larger, so therefore you can't just do a push upgrade, right? It's got to be managed. So it's either us supporting them or them doing it with our support. In some instances, they purchase a package which we call Expert on Demand, where we do it for them. We do the setup in the sandbox, and then we prepare it for the push production and all of this. Now, that then came all the way back into like product roadmap and product development, because it was basically like, we can see that bit's going to get more and more complex over time. So therefore, we're making refinements to our core products to reduce that technical debt and to create a more we have managed services, but we want it to be a much more agile um advisory overlay versus
Mhm.
maintenance,
Yeah.
right? And it grows up as maintenance, and it's like, that's not value add unless the client just wants to ship that labor effort to an external company and say, okay, I'm not doing that internally, and you can do it for me at a lower cost and probably better quality, as you taught me. But it's like, so it was quite unintentional. So
Yeah.
anyway, I can tick that one off of my my list if I
And you touch
didn't screw
upon
that up.
another important one, and it brings me a little bit back to how you build products and so on. The continuous deployment of what you do. I mean, you have continuous development of your software.
Yep.
It goes on, right?
Yep.
There's new features being released. There's new
Yep.
configuration updates that you might want to release. All that, either can be done in a labor-intensive, either managed services or project services type of way, or if you're really a little bit ahead of the technology game, then you probably have a continuous deployment framework that allows for qualification of all these changes so the reality of your clients doesn't break. You can
Mm.
even offer that as an additional software service package component, that you have continuous deployment of changes and enablement of new features that is directly brought to them without destroying any of the existing. I mean, to someone who has never been dealing with complex software would probably think like, why would that be a problem? But in reality, it is, right? Because
Mm.
these are humongous beasts, the softwares that we're talking about, and an amazing complexity of possible configurations. And if you
Yep.
do the math on this, just on the back of the envelope, it goes with faculties and so on. It explodes super fast. And in every highly complex software, and there's thousands of that in the
Yep.
world, the amount of parameter permutations is probably bigger than the amount of atoms in the universe. So no
Mm.
way of being in control of all of that all the time. So you need to know, what do your customers use? How do they exactly use this? What would a new change do to this? And being in control of this on a continuous basis is much more a technology game than a services game.
Yep.
Same as with, if we talk about consumption model, if you want to do any utilization-based pricing in the future,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
And you really want like a transactional. So I am the vendor, you are my client, and if your business grows, well, of course you pay more. So we both benefit for your with your success. That's a nice model, and if you're part of the value creation chain, probably your clients would like that too. But in order to do that, you need to be able to have telemetry for what is the actual outcome that a client is producing. And
Yep.
it's so easy to say that here on a podcast, but it's very, very difficult to nail it in your product. Don't just measure what you can measure. You need to really find out, what is the outcomes that our clients are producing. How are we contributing to this? How can we quantify this? How can we secure this so that there's a price model that is also not cheatable in a way, neither by you nor by the client. And
Yep.
that's a lot easier said than done. And it's much of that is a technology game and very little service game.
Okay. So the consumption model piece that you touched on there. So like, again, so as you know, like, we're listeners, we're bringing out a white paper on this packaging topic. So I was doing the research on there, and as you know, I got very excited about the stage where you come to sell the packages, as you as you commented. Um, And you were really saying, like, you were reframing my thinking on it of like flip it and start thinking about it from the consumption perspective. So for people approaching this, talk us through like what do we mean by consumption, and what are some examples of consumption models for customers or that customers
So
use?
yeah, so I differentiate a delivery perspective, like that's the components of how you orchestrate your delivery engine, right? And
Yep.
you might have a lot of fragmented pieces, like they are doing testing and they're doing this and they're doing that type of service and they do the version control, whatever that might be looking like. You have a large list of components, you could say, that you organize in your delivery unit for services. The clients couldn't care much about that complexity. It exists. You need to be in control of this, no doubt. But for the clients, for your consumers, that is not an interesting dimension. They don't want to have the complexity to deal with to find out what exactly components do I need. So they come to you with much rather a wider business sense of, I want to use your product for X, Y, Z. I don't know, to produce car parts and orchestrate the logistics, whatever it might be. I don't care. And they want something, then you would sell them a package that would be car part something, something, something package. And it consists probably of 108 different components. And you can make it transparent to the client, but they don't want to deal with the complexity. So this translation metrics of delivery dimension and consumption dimension is your own setup is the horizontal one, and the customer consumption is the vertical one. And that's a different dimension. And this complexity you should own as the vendor and make sure that the consumption is easy. And you do that by packaging. Right? So that's how you create the packages. Then the question is, of course, how do you sell this? So how do you price the packages and what is the right thing for that? And that again depends on what is the value proposition that a package would deliver to your customer. And also probably what are your technical capabilities. So if you want a volume-based pricing model, well, how do you measure the volume? Right? Do you want a license-based? That's also fine. It's a little more old-fashioned, but it doesn't mean it's wrong. It really depends on what is your business model, what is your client's business model, how many different business models are you serving, and what variation of your pricing do you need, so neither one pulls each other's pizzle.
Yeah. Okay. So just to kind of play that back then. So you're thinking fundamentally you're thinking about, right, what is for the customer, what is the simplest, what is the mechanism or the route to value from this service that is as kind of like elegant and simple, that matches kind of how they think they want to consume it or how they should consume it?
Yeah, and that can depend. I think it also depends a bit on the maturity of your customer base. In some constellations, they have a very established service consumption mindset, and in some they don't. That is probably something you have to figure out first as to what applies to you in the individual case.
Okay,
but for example,
just on that. Sorry. So what you're saying there is like that might be, if you're doing this, think about maybe the maturity of the customers or what their attitude's going to be to that buying of this, the consumption of it. So for example, if you use service points where it's like use it or lose it, and they're like, yeah, I know that kind of model, that makes sense, that's fine. And then someone else might go, what, if I don't use it, I've got to pay? No chance.
Exactly. And it really depends on whether, if I'm the consumer, if I'm trying to get a risk reduction from you, then I might be fine with an insurance like flat fee type of payment, right? So I pay, and if there's no insurance case, money's gone. That's part of the risk takeover, right? That's a totally different value. a totally different value proposition than if your delivery is intricately embedded in my own value contribution. So the more I need your contribution, the more success I have. But if I don't need your contribution at all, I'm having no money to pay you even, sort of, right? So I think what you should really do is look at your client base and cluster them with regards to their why do they actually buy from you preferences. That's a starting point. And then I would also ask you the question, why do you think about packaging in the first place? So what triggers this conversation that we're having here at all? So what is your own problem statement? What do you want to fix with this? Do you want to gain market share in an existing market? Do you want to conquer new markets? Do you want to stop a downward trend of your retention numbers? Or what is the problem? Mm-hmm. Because I think the answer to how do you package and how do you put your consumption model up depends on the problem you're trying to be solving.
Right. Okay. Cool. Awesome.
And then, just to mention, it's not just the price. I mean, the pricing is, if you come from sales, it's of course a very important and relevant piece. Mm-hmm. If you decide to actually add service offerings that you didn't ever offer before, which is a little bit part of this managed services game that we're talking about, because you're stepping into the reality that your clients have every day as a vendor. And there is a big pitfall but I know my clients because we work very closely with our clients, so we know really how their business looks like. In reality, you don't. Because there's so much more business that happens outside your software that is still done by the same people that you need to take into account as well. Because if clients want to give you a competency area to do it for them, they want the entire competency area to give to you, not what is convenient to you, everything. Otherwise, there's no business in that construction with them. And that is like, imagine you produce kitchen equipment for a professional restaurant kitchen, right? And your professional services is the installing, the assembly of the kitchen and make sure that it's ready to use in the beginning. If you then step into more services, you either run a grocery delivery thing that the fridges are always full when they come in the morning, and that it's always clean, for example. Or you even say you deliver fully cooked meals to them and to the restaurant. But if you believe that the people who have the expertise of building kitchen equipment are also great at doing the actual cooking, you're probably wrong. What I'm trying to say with this is there is likely a competency gap. If you try to offer a new service stack element in this infrastructure, platform, application, business services layering, then you don't have it in-house, even though you might tend to believe you do.
That's interesting. Yeah. It reminds me of what Gartner actually did. Because one of the things that Gartner discovered after a period of time is that their researchers could only go so far in helping their clients. And it got to a point where that domain expertise, that competency gap was the missing bit. So they started hiring former CIOs to come in and work for their business. I mean, their primary customer base meant this is 10, 15 years ago was IT. So they started hiring CIOs, heads of infrastructure, heads of apps to come in and become advisors that they can got folded into that research and that subscription offer. I know because I used to work for a competitor of theirs and then we got bought by them. It just kind of reminds me of that. So I think that there's that domain expertise, right? Which is also a bit of I think the domain expertise sounds to be so important. I think what's also interesting to me is a lot of the complaint that you will hear from customer success leaders is that their CS teams don't have enough domain expertise. Or support teams as well, right? We'll say the same thing. I remember talking to John Harrison, who was the VP of, at the time, the VP of Services and Success at Sage. And we were having a catch up and he was like, I've had a shit day. And he's like, I've just come off an escalation call and I'm trying to explain to a head of finance that our support staff are not qualified accountants, right? and it's like this everyone's looking for this domain expertise and like, how do you upskill and all of this type of thing. But it feels like in a way that's why that managed services organization is a risk. But it's also why if you can get the right domain expertise into that, let's call it the growth sale journey, right? The in-life journey to augment your CS team who are doing more of the, I always get this wrong. Is kissing, kissing babies and shaking hands is what my CCO says. But I always say it's like kissing hands and shaking babies, and he's like, no, it's definitely not shaking babies. No, but you know what I mean. You'd have that balance between like that relationship piece, and then so I just think that's super interesting, that competency gap piece.
Yeah. And when I said there's a lot of pitfalls you can fall into. There's also, on the other hand, there's also a big upside, if you go on that journey, because let's just say you do offer a business service and you have clients relationships where you're basically acting as the client's right arm, integrated into their own value proposition. That knowledge is invaluable as input about how you should configure standards for the clients that are not your business service clients, but probably just platform service clients.
Yep.
How do you build out the product for better automation of what really matters for the total life of your customers? So the insight that you gain by doing it yourself is a sustainable feeding into your product management as well. So you can either do product management as part of the they do all the research, and they are fantastic people, right? But they still develop that from an inside-out perspective from the software company angle. Or you can turn it upside down, put operations first, and say the business operators, they are the domain experts about how to automate something and what is more important than something else. So there's a lot of opportunity, I think, in that field as well.
Okay, cool. Right. Final thing, metrics that matter, right? So what are some of the key KPIs here? I'm sure there are lots, but what are some of the key ones for people to be focused on?
So naturally, you need, you get what you measure is also applies here. So if you want a combination of customer success and profitability, then you need to measure for both. They can actually be a little counterintuitive or work against each other. So you need to find a really good balance for this. But if I'm starting with a service layer that I didn't have before, the higher up in the service stack you go from software, infrastructure, platform, application services, and business services, the higher up you go, the more ready your offer needs to be before you go to market. So while you can mature software with a partner client and development partner, et cetera, very difficult with a business service. So you cannot sell them with feature demonstrations. You do sell these higher stack services by SLAs, runbooks. This is how we work, and the trust that is related with references that you have from elsewhere. So two things matter: effectivity of your service setup and efficiency. That is what you want to measure. But effectivity needs to come first the higher up you go in the service stack. If you get the necessary satisfaction with the outcome not right, you're out of the business of that service landscape faster than you can get into it again. But of course, you need to make it efficient. So you want to automate. Sorry, my friend, you want to automate the shit out of your engine. So it's not managed services. It's not the business of having a greatly extensive amount of people working on manual service delivery. It's really about how do you automate what really is valuable for automating for your clients' businesses. And that is just turning that upside down. So you probably want to measure customer success in a couple of ways, like adoption rates, utilization metrics if you have telemetry built in, expansion rates, net promoter score, other customer success metrics you're going to come up. Like if you really believe that when you make your customer successful, you will be more successful, you can just as well monitor the actual success metrics of your clients.
Yeah.
Not a necessarily bad idea.
Yep.
But you also want to have the internal things of efficiency, like, I don't know, margin per customer, classical business P&L mechanics, like, how many people do I need? What's the overhead? How much manual labor needs to go into something? What is the total cost of delivery, including machines and automation work that needs to go in, plus, of course, the labor cost and everything else included, and make just proper, simple P&L considerations on your investment decisions, for example, also on, do I want to automate that now as the next thing, or do I not want to do that?
Yeah.
If the business case isn't good enough, then don't.
There we go. See, I've run you ragged, and now you're needing a glass of water. So awesome show. Thank you ever so much, Mark. Dankeschön. So much good stuff in there. Absolutely loved it. So thank you for joining, sir. Did you enjoy it?
It was a great pleasure, Jonathan. So thanks for having me and for spending your time with me.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Take care.
Take care.